Okay, can you guys hear me now? Great. Sorry about that. I don't know what was going on. My settings must have been changed accidentally. So let me kind of go and begin to ask or answer the only questions that I've seen so far is kind of which topics are going to be on the quiz. So the first topic that we're going to kind of talk about is really that French and Indian War. Remember, that's kind of that time period, really kind of right after that colonization phase that we had talked about in our last unit. So after the French and Indian War, and we're going to go into these a lot more depth as we go here, but just kind of as a bit of a recap here, we're going to talk about the American response to the French and Indian War, and then ultimately how the British act after and how they're going to impose all these taxes and different acts and things like that on the Americans, which are going to get the Americans very frustrated and upset with them, and you're going to lead to American resistance by people known as the Sons of Liberty and other patriots and just people that are frustrated and upset with these people. After that, we're going to talk about the Declaration of Independence and the Continental Congress and stuff that makes that happen, and ultimately also Thomas Paine's Common Sense, which precedes that as this argument kind of for pushing away and being their own entity. So after that, we're going to talk about the war itself and kind of recap all of these things for you guys. So are there any specific questions before I kind of just do a general kind of talk over this stuff? Obviously, this is meant to really be student driven, and it's meant to kind of specifically answer questions that you guys have, but if that's not going to happen, we can kind of carry on and I can kind of reiterate a bunch of points that you guys should remember going into your quiz. I'm going to be using kind of a little bit different PowerPoints than you guys have used in class because I just have them access to them a little easier, and I think it's kind of what I've used in the past, so it's more or less the exact same information, so we'll kind of go that route in a second here. So let's kind of, while we're waiting here, I'm going to bring up this kind of first PowerPoint that I'm going to kind of talk through while we go. So give me a second. So from the current slide. Okay. Oops, I'm on the wrong spot here. Sorry, give me 1 second, guys. Actually, you know what? You guys can see. I think we'll be fine. So you guys can read that and see. You know what? Sorry, give me 1 more second. All right, there we go. That's what I wanted. Beautiful. So let's kind of talk about the French and Indian War, right? This is going to be the Revolutionary Era, this kind of whole deal leading up to that. So, right, the French and Indian War, if you remember at the end of colonization, was this time period where you are going to get basically competition in America, right, on the American continent by these different European countries, right? They're going to be competing for these, trade and such all over the globe, but in particular, it's going to come to head here in North America. And the American colony's biggest threat in the New World is France, right? Mostly due to the proximity and how close they are, right? You're going to have, I'm going to show you a map here. You're going to have these kind of French forts that kind of materialize. I can zoom in right there, kind of along this kind of border between the British colonies and what is French territory. But what's going to happen is you're going to get more and more people showing up and colonizing on the eastern side of this, and as the land fills up, people are going to need to spread west, right? And as they spread west, they run into a couple different things. They run into Native Americans, for one, and they also run into the French eventually, right, at this border here of their land. So this is kind of the climate and the, kind of the way this land has shaken up right around 1750. The French and Indian War is going to kick off in 1756. So this is kind of that climate and what you're looking at right there. So, right, as we just kind of said, the arrival of more settlers is going to push people west, and ultimately the British are going to kind of look to take over the fur trade a little bit, which if you remember, then, the natives were seriously working well with the French up in that area for that fur trade, but the Brits are just going to be eyeing that stuff and eyeing the land over the Appalachian Mountains, right? So you have the Appalachian Mountains, but on the other side you have this Ohio River Valley, which is called, and that Ohio River Valley is ultimately going to be an extremely important, because it's fertile land, right? It's really, really good land. The British want it, and so do the French. And don't forget, there's also Native Americans there in this equation as well. And also, it's really important because the Ohio River actually basically comes really all the way from western Pennsylvania, and actually, if the map extended, it would actually dump into the Mississippi River. So that's important because you can get stuff all the way out, basically down here and then out into the Gulf and out wherever you want as far as shipping. So that's really important. So Native Americans are going to come into play. You're actually going to kind of have what's known as the French and the Huron. They're going to be kind of buddy-buddy, and the English are going to kind of look to make friends with the Iroquois. So anyway, to make that really simple. So this is going to begin, right, we talked about in western Pennsylvania at a place called Fort Necessity. Out in 1755, essentially, George Washington is going to be given this command, and he's going to be sent out west to kind of create this fort right along the Ohio River and kind of this area over here. But when he gets there, he finds out that the French had actually gotten there first. And you're going to kind of get this fight between these two, and George Washington's going to basically get pretty badly beat up, and as a result, no one knows really who fired first and who actually started this war. You know, the French are going to say that obviously the British did, and the British are going to say the French did. So we don't really know, exactly who. But basically, ultimately, George Washington is going to be kicked out. He's going to get badly defeated and kind of pushed back. He's going to be allowed to leave, but he's going to give up a lot of his military supplies and stuff to be allowed to leave with his men. So he goes back, and he's going to come back ultimately a year later with other British forces as well, but we'll get to that in a second. But during this time period, you also talk about this Albany Congress. So what's going to happen is you're going to get this meeting up in Albany, New York. Can everyone still hear me? Since Max seems to be having an issue. Maybe you're just muted, Max, although you can't hear me, apparently. Can everyone still hear me? Just verify, please. Okay, so it must be just on your end, Max. I'm sorry. So anyway, so basically, this Congress is called up in Albany, and the purpose of that is really to try to secure an alliance with the Iroquois, which doesn't necessarily go well. This Native American group, right? The French had a group of Native Americans, so if the British can get Native Americans to help them too, it just helps with the war. But Ben Franklin is going to kind of be there, and he's going to suggest kind of bringing this group together to kind of form kind of a one general government, and really to be able to deal with this French threat, make laws, raise taxes, kind of set up an army to deal with the colonies, and it's not going to ultimately be accepted. But it's kind of this place where you get this propaganda that kind of happens, right? This join or die, join everyone together, or we're going to lose this war, essentially, right? This peace that we've shown in class a couple times. It's going to also show up in the Revolution, right? So ultimately, you're going to get this. Now, down in Virginia, again, you're going to basically get George Washington under the command of Edward Braddock, and he is going to kind of lead this attack against the French out there in western Pennsylvania again, and they're going to get badly whooped again. Braddock's going to die. They're going to get, even though the British heavily outnumber the French are going to completely catch them off guard and surprise them with Native American allies, and they're just going to get whooped. And they're going to basically, leave again with their tail between their legs. And really, the next couple years are still going to go badly for the British. It's just not going to go well. We don't necessarily need to know those battles there or anything, but it's just know that the beginning of the war goes very badly for the British. Until things kind of turn around, you're going to get this kind of change in England, and that change in England is really going to make a difference. They're going to kind of prioritize the war. And under this man named William Pitt, who's going to ultimately be named, Pittsburgh's going to be named after this war, essentially he's going to kind of turn it around and reprioritize the war, and after that, the French are going to it's going to be just a matter of time before the French end up losing. They're going to kind of gather up their support, they're going to send better generals over and things like that, and the French are going to lose at a place called, at the Battle of Quebec, which you guys could know, and ultimately, at this point, it's the end of the French power in North America. The war is going to be fought elsewhere, right? It's the 7 Years' War. It's not just the French and Indian War, and this is kind of a global conflict that's happening in Europe as well. And the French just decide ultimately it's not worth fighting in North America anymore at this point. So after the war is over and the British have won. Actually, this is wrong on the bottom there. I need to change that. But I'll get to that in a second, right? So once the war is over, the British basically they're going to sign this new treaty with France, right? It's called the Treaty of Paris, and it's going to now change the dynamic in the area, right? You're going to have Great Britain now controlling all the way out to the Mississippi River and taking control of much of that French land that had been over there. Remember, the border had kind of been roughly here where my mouse is going right now. And what's going to also happen is now France is going to... They screwed up, and they had asked Spain to help them. So that last part of this is wrong. I need to change that. I'm sorry. But basically, France and Spain had joined up, and France, out of forgiveness for basically making Spain lose this war with Britain, is going to essentially give up this land west of the Mississippi River that they had to Spain in general. And Spain is going to give up Florida to kind of make this continuous. Now, England on the right and Spain on the west. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. If you have any questions, obviously, as we go along, feel free to ask, okay? So you're going to have some quick clashes with Native Americans, right? You're going to have, I'm going to show this line, and I'll go back in a second, right? This kind of line, which had been the border of the British territories now, you're going to have colonists that are kind of pushing over that line. Right? And as they push over that line, there's Native Americans that were there. And you're going to get what's called this Pontiacs War. Pontiac's going to lead this kind of revolt against the British colonists heading west, not wanting them to kind of take over their land, right? So this conflict with Native Americans that they get is going to be a problem for the British, because they don't want to have to really kind of protect these colonists. So one of the things that they're going to do, and this is going to be kind of what Mr. McNabb was talking about potentially as this kind of beginning of the kind of hostilities between the different groups, is you're going to get this proclamation line that's established. And as this line is established kind of right on the crest of the Appalachian Mountains, kind of all the way down the coast, down here, right? And it's going to basically, it's meant to forbid the Americans, the American colonists, right, from heading over that line. They're forbidden. They're not allowed to. And the British are going to send troops to enforce this line. And the colonists are going to be really frustrated about this, right? They're going to feel that it was their right to ultimately do this. They just fought a war over this, right? And many of them are going to simply just ignore it, and the British are going to also then send troops to kind of enforce this, and these troops are going to usually end up in Boston and Massachusetts area, which is going to lead to a lot of tension, which we're going to be talking about momentarily. So the taxes, right? So the war was very expensive, and the British are going to want the Americans to kind of pay their fair share, is what they're going to say. And that fair share is, to them, they're going to make the Americans pay taxes, and their tax is going to initially be on sugar. The first act is called the Sugar Act in 1764. It's going to place this tax on molasses, which is going to be this kind of valuable trade in the valuable item in this triangular trade. Molasses actually turns into rum, and you're going to get smuggling of these goods. They're going to be avoiding paying the taxes. So the colonists are going to be really upset, and they're going to get angry and frustrated, and they're going to basically they're going to be really pissed, and they're going to do all sorts of things. They're going to protest, and they're going to, as we saw in class, right, you saw the tarring and feathering, the effigies, these dolls that are hung up, all the flags in protest, right, don't tread on me, all of those things. So the British are going to basically actually kind of listen to them on some level, and they're going to say, sure, okay, you don't want to be taxed on sugar, so let's tax you on something else, which is not what the Americans really wanted. They just didn't want to be taxed at all, but the British were intent on getting their money. Right, so they place these new taxes. They call it the Stamp Act, right? The Stamp Act is going to be on legal documents such as wills, diplomas, marriage papers, tax on newspapers, almanacs, things like that. And you're not paying a tax on stamps. You're actually paying, when you pay the tax, they would stamp the document saying that you would pay the tax. That's where the stamp comes from. Okay, so again, they're going to boycott and be frustrated and angry. So what do the British do? They actually basically say, okay, well, fine, we'll find something else to tax you again. They're not kind of getting the message, or they simply just don't care about the message. And you're going to get what's now called the Townshend Acts. And the Townshend Acts are essentially similar, different just taxes, right? glass, paper, paint, lead, and tea. But the difference is now they're going to enforce these taxes on the harbor. They're going to basically create what's called these writs of assistance. It's going to allow British officers in the harbor to basically inspect cargo, trying to stop this smuggling. And they're going to be able to inspect it with no reason, right? It's basically like being able to be searched without a warrant today. And this is going to infuriate the colonists and really make them really frustrated. And it's going to basically go against their rights as Englishmen, right? And it's going to stop. The Americans are going to kind of stop importing these goods in hopes that without importing them, they're not going to collect the tax, and ultimately they'll repeal the Act too. Right, you get the effigies, you get the tarring and feathering that we saw in class with the Sam Adams, the John Adams, sorry, the thing that we watched for that's on HBO. So all of this is going to come to head a little bit at what's called the Boston Massacre. It happens in 1770. There's this Quartering Act, which we kind of alluded to just before, with the troops that are being sent over there to kind of enforce a lot of these acts and enforce the proclamation. So this Quartering Act basically forced the colonists, in some cases, to provide housing and things like that to the soldiers, right? You're going to actually have 2 full regiments of British soldiers stationed in Boston, and you're gonna see. Remember, we saw this also in class with the video from John Adams, the miniseries. You're going to see, provocation on some level from the Americans, right? They had these clubs. You had people throwing snowballs and things like that. And ultimately, in this altercation, the British are gonna open fire, right? And when they open fire, ultimately 5 colonists are going to die. One of them is Crispus Attucks. He's an African American. That's kind of why that's relevant. He's a former slave. But he's going to turn into this protest of this bloody massacre, right? And this is that propaganda piece that we had shown in class that John Hancock actually made. And it's going to basically be sent all over the colonies, and it's going to become this huge, huge piece. It's going to be this rally for independence, right? People are going to get really frustrated about it, and it's just not, they're going to be really upset with the British, and it's just going to lead to more problems, right? So the next big event is going to be this Tea Act and ultimately the Tea Party. And the Tea Act, to keep it really simple, is just basically, it's forcing the Americans to buy British tea and cutting out any other foreign tea sellers, and therefore Americans that were working with them, and the Americans can't make money on it anymore, and it's coming directly from Britain. So a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, and as they lose their jobs, they can't make money for the families, they're going to get frustrated. You're going to get more and more of these protests, but ultimately you're going to get the Sons of Liberty, who, led by Sam Adams, right, John Adams' cousin. Were they ordered to shoot, or did they just shoot? So there's all sorts of speculation on that, and you're going to kind of get different sides, but it is kind of agreed upon, right? I'm going to go back to the... sorry, I'm going to go back to this for a second. It's kind of agreed upon that, in the trial anyway, that the first shot was accidental. And after that, they were ordered to fire, especially as the American crowd started to move in on them with clubs and things like that. So that's kind of the thought anyway. And for sure, they were ordered to fire, but the thought, is that the first shot was an accidental discharge of their musket, and as a result of that, the Americans kind of pushed in even more aggressively, and that's when the real shooting began. Okay, so anyway, you get this dumping of the tea, right? This Tea Act, the Tea Party, into the harbor, and ultimately the British Parliament are going to punish the colonies with what's called the Coercive Acts, and the Americans are going to dub them the Intolerable Acts. And the Intolerable Acts do a couple of different things. The big thing, though, that you guys are going to need to know, without getting too much into detail here, is that they shut down the port of Boston, right? You are also going to have them forbidding any town meetings, gatherings of large amount of people in here, in Boston, Massachusetts, as a result, without the governor's permission explicitly. These British officials that are going to be also tried in Britain or Canada instead of America, and this is going to really anger the Americans, because when they do this, ultimately it's going to be this when they do this, basically the Americans are going to lose the ability to convict these people for justice, right? And then also it's going to reinforce that Coercive Act that we just talked about. So let's wrap this kind of the lead up to the American Revolution anyway with this Lexington and Concord, right? So what's going to happen is you're going to get now a little bit more of an aggressive action by the British, and they're going to leave Boston under the command of General Gage, and they're going to go and attempt to basically clear out an armory of these militia, of these revolutionaries. They didn't want these guns falling in their hands. Really, to have them, they didn't want these people to have these guns and weapons and powder and things like that, just because, obviously. And you're going to get this kind of, as they leave, you're going to get this famous ride of Paul Revere, warning people, right? One, if by land, two, if by sea, the British are coming, the British are coming. There's a famous poem that really, is related to that. You're going to get an initial stop of these British by 70 or so Minutemen, right? These people that are ready to stop at a minute's notice, to go fight at a minute's notice, right? Grab their rifle and grab their powder and basically run out the door and kind of join the militia. You're going to get an altercation between them, an actual armed conflict between them, right? And when you get this, there's going to be a shot that's fired again. No one knows who actually shot this first, and it's going to be known as "This shot heard around the world" because it's going to change the world forever, really, when this fully goes on. And ultimately, the Americans are going to kind of regroup after this, after the British push toward Concord, where that store of weaponry was, and you're going to then get a kind of a new attack by the Americans, larger amount of militia at this point, versus the British, and they're going to kind of wound the British, deeply, killing 73, wounding 200. Don't worry about those numbers, but the British are going to kind of run all the way back to Boston as these Minutemen are firing at them. So that's kind of it for this one. Okay, so let's kind of keep rolling on here. Does anyone have any questions about this so far before we kind of get into our next phase? And I want to take a quick break here from talking. So, anyway, so let's kind of get into our next kind of PowerPoint, next kind of section. And I'm going to kind of try to cut a couple things because this PowerPoint's going to have a little bit more than what we talked about in class, just from my old stuff. But basically, let's talk about the American Revolution now, right? And kind of different aspects of it. So you're going to get the news of Lexington and Concord, which we were just talking about, right? These two kind of areas outside of Boston. It's going to kind of spread very rapidly, and it's going to kind of rally troops to head specifically to Boston to kind of help fight against the British. And there are still colonists that are going to hope kind of to avoid all-out war, and we're going to be talking about that. You're going to get the Continental Congress, but this is just real quick because it does become relevant in a second. You're going to get fighting also up in northern New York at Lake George, which is kind of like right actually here, and you're going to basically get these people stealing guns and taking the fort and taking them from the British, which are going to come into play in Boston in a second. So that's why I'm talking about that, right? So you're going to get the Second Continental Congress after the first one, and the first one deals with explicitly kind of trying to make peace with Britain, but also trying to kind of stop the acts and stop what they're doing by boycotting goods and things like that of British. That's not going to go over great, just because of how long it takes for those messages to get over to Britain and back. There's a lot of things that happen in between. So the Second Continental Congress is going to happen after Lexington and Concord, and this is going to change things, right? It's going to change the view of many of these people because you're going to get a number of people now feeling like the British have attacked, right? That's going to change some of the ideas, but people are still going to be upset against it, and they're going to not go fully to war. They're going to actually issue what's called the Olive Branch Petition, which is kind of on my next slide here. And the Olive Branch Petition is kind of one last vie for peace, but they're also going to approve George Washington being the head of what's going to become known as the Continental Army, right? And they send this Olive Branch Petition. They also dispatch George Washington straight to Boston, and you're going to now get this other attack at Bunker Hill in Boston, right outside of Boston, where we showed this animated image, which I'll show again in a second, but Bunker Hill is located kind of right outside the main city, out off of, across some of the water anyway. But basically, the British are going to make a move on an encamped, entrenched American position at the top of this hill, and 6,000 or so British are going to kind of be here at this battle, and about 1,200 Minutemen, and they're going to basically, British are going to try to take the position, right, and they're going to go up the hill. They're going to be, the British are going to continuously be ferried over there to get more and more reinforcements to keep trying to take this hill, and I'll show you the animated image in a second. So you can see the British dropping off these people, right, the troops, and you can see them firing at each other, the Americans, some reinforcements, and also trying to kind of entrench. So the British go up the hill, they get beaten back, they're going to go up the hill again, they're going to get beaten back one more time, and ultimately this last time they're going to get pushed forward. So sorry, I'm going to kind of stop here for a second. So where did they get all of their guns? The Americans, Alex? Why is this doing this? So if you're talking about the Americans, it's really just simply most of these people owned their own guns, right? These militiamen, and so they kind of take their weapons to the they just take their weapons with them when they go fight. So why are they fighting? It's simply just the British at this point are done dealing with these revolutionaries. They're going to kind of suppress this rebellion once and for all. The peace petition, the olive bread petition, they stop it. They just say, no, enough's enough. We're going to squash this rebellion, and tough luck, basically. So that's why they're fighting. So they make a move now. And they make a move at Bunker Hill right here, as you kind of just saw in this image. So this is kind of it again, right? They just drop them off. They send them up. But the big thing is, right, the Americans are going to ultimately run out of ammo. And once they run out of ammo, that's when the British are able to take the field. But the thing is that, yes, the British technically win the battle. But the difference is, no, it's okay, Steph. You can watch the beginning of the live stream earlier. From earlier, you'll be able to watch it later. Obviously, about half an hour. Once this is done, it's gonna basically automatically upload itself to the channel, so you can catch what you missed. So you can catch up then. So, and that goes for anyone who's watching later here. So, again, right, the British are repelled multiple times. The colonists are going to run out of ammo, and the British are going to win this battle. But the difference is simply that when it comes down to it, they lose a lot of men, right? They're going to lose about 1,000 casualties between dead and wounded. It's going to be more than double the colonists' casualties. And this is going to kind of show the colonists that they can kind of fight this war. This ragtag militia army just kind of held off on some level the British Empire. So you're going to get more of this fight for Boston. George Washington's going to arrive. He's going to fortify these positions. And these guns that I was just talking about from Fort Ticonderoga, over in New York, ones we kind of just talked about just a second ago. They basically get dragged all the way from Lake George, New York, over to Boston, and they bring these guns, they put them up on this big hill outside of Boston, and they start shooting the British ships. And when they shoot the British ships, the British get really nervous. And when they get nervous, essentially, they don't want to lose these ships, right? And they leave. They just leave Boston. And they actually peacefully do it. They don't light fire to the city. They don't destroy the city or anything like that. They just leave, and they gather up the loyal British, the loyal colonists anyway, and take them with them. They leave they actually retreat from kind of Boston area, right where my mouse is. I'll go to the map here, right where the mouse is, and kind of up into this Nova Scotia, Halifax area, where they're going to kind of regather, gain momentum, get reinforcements, and kind of now make a different push, right? So let's kind of... Don't worry about any of these three. This is just people that I talked about in my others class in my old school. But we're going to kind of focus mostly on John Locke here, right? So let's kind of take a step back from the actual actions of the war and talk about, the ideas that are going behind the revolution, right? So you're going to have John Locke being this major philosopher, right? Enlightenment thinker that's going to kind of be heavily used in the discussion for the Declaration of Independence, right? You are going to get his ideas basically being taken by Thomas Jefferson and making up much of the wording for the Declaration of Independence, right? So John Locke Keep that in mind. He's going to be the guy that kind of dubs a couple different things, right? The whole idea of natural rights. Natural rights being life, liberty, and the protection of property, which is going to be kind of change the wording a little bit to the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, right? So keep that in mind. Also, he's going to kind of bring up this idea of the social contract and kind of what people's rights are if a government is not protecting those rights. So we'll kind of talk about that more just now in a second. Okay, so you get the Declaration of Independence, and it's done by, right, Thomas Jefferson, fellow Virginian. So Thomas Jefferson, when in the course, I can probably read it actually from here, maybe a little bit. But anyway, right, so we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those rights are life, liberty, and the protection, and the pursuit of happiness. He goes further on in the Declaration to talk about, so I'll get to there, Eric, about the French helping the colonists. Okay, it's going to be another couple minutes before we get there. But right, so there is your natural rights, right? Everyone is born with these. At least men are born with these. They kind of aren't necessarily talking about slaves at this point or Native Americans, but they're talking about land-owning men, basically. Everyone, of course, is going to be born with these natural rights, and essentially. It's going to go on to further say, right, that if a government is going against the will of the people, and if a government is essentially attacking those people and oppressing those people and kind of not allowing those people to have those rights, it is the right of those people to abolish the government, to get rid of it, to rebel, to revolt, to do whatever they need to necessary to stop it, to stop these oppressions, right? And that's huge, right? In this idea that government gets its power from the consent of the governed. You need to know 100% about the Declaration of Independence, for sure. Those things are definitely going to end up on there. So this whole idea that government gets its power from the consent of the governed is seriously this groundbreaking stuff, right? Think about how governments were set up, right? You had this divine right of kings, right? These people were dictators essentially, or they at least authoritarian, and they had all the power for the most part, until you get to kind of some pushback by the people. So this idea that government is there for the people, and that the people can decide what type of government that they want. This is groundbreaking, Enlightenment, revolutionary stuff, and it's going to impact these people's positions and how they handle this. You're also going to get, it's kind of, you really can't see, I can't zoom in anymore, sadly, but you're also going to get this section in this that's known as Grievances. Think of it like a breakup letter, right? This is America breaking up with England, breaking up with the king, and they're basically telling him, this is why, right? We've had a good relationship up until now, we had a long, good run, but here's ultimately why we are breaking up, and you lay out all these grievances, right? All those different acts, no taxation without representation, all of those things. Okay, so keep that in mind. Okay, and moving on. So you're going to also get different types of colonists, right? You're going to get some people that basically are loyal to the British Crown. They're simply called Loyalists or Tories, and this is going to be typically wealthy merchants that had connections in England and officials of the royal government and things like that. They had the most to lose by the fight, so they wanted to back the people that had been good to them. But you're also going to get these patriots, right? These people who favored the war against Britain. They were poorly organized typically, but they were determined to fight for their homes, their property, their rights, right? Things we just talked about. So let's kind of briefly, again, we don't need to necessarily go into huge detail about any of these battles, but this is Long Island. Hopefully you know where that is on a larger map. New York City is located kind of right here. And basically what's going to happen is that England, after regrouping after their loss up in Boston, who broke up with who? The Americans are essentially breaking up with King George. So I am doing a main overview right now, Steph, in general anyway, so I don't necessarily, this is kind of all stuff that could end up on the test, honestly, most of it. So I don't necessarily have specific questions to review, but you guys will play a Kahoot before your test, your quiz, and some of those questions, could very well end up on the quiz, okay? So Anyway, so you're going to have the British basically, the Americans basically set up a whole group kind of right here in western Long Island, which is what's known as Brooklyn, still is Brooklyn today. You have Brooklyn over here, and essentially the British are going to come in, they're going to land about 30,000 plus people with a large navy, and they're going to basically, an invasion force, right? And they're going to invade, and they're going to kind of sweep their way down Long Island, and they're going to basically push the Americans off of this. They are going to be ferried across. The Americans are going to retreat. They're going to do it quietly, and the British aren't going to realize it, but they're going to retreat onto Manhattan Island, and ultimately they're going to be pushed up the island as well, and then retreat into New Jersey, which is over here. So this war starts, very, very poorly. The war starts very, very poorly for the Americans. They're poorly trained, they're outnumbered, they're outclassed in every single way, and they're going to have to retreat. So the Manhattan, also goes poorly. They're going to kind of retreat into Fort Lee, New Jersey, right across really where the George Washington Bridge is right now. And what's going to happen is this is kind of this victory in Trenton that we talked about in class, right? You're going to get this surprise attack on these Hessians, these German mercenaries, right? And ultimately, these people are there to fight, and they're being paid by the British. So what happens is the Americans are going to come in. They're gonna stick it to them. Sorry, guys, give me 1 second. Oh no, that's not what I wanted to do. So anyway, sorry, I had to take care of that. Hi Nick, how are you? If you want to watch the beginning of the feed, you should be able to just rewind, I think. If not, you can watch it once it goes onto the channel later, archived. Okay. So back to Trenton, right? So the Americans kind of sweep all the way down through Pennsylvania, and this is going to be really big because, as we talked about, those enlistments were up at the end of the year, right? And when those enlistments are up, many people who were upset and tired of being basically destroyed by the British, they're going to leave, right? So Washington has to do something quick to kind of reestablish this morale, and they attack at Trenton. Surprise attack. They ferry themselves across the Delaware. You have this famous, painting that's done years later about it, and ultimately it's a stunning victory. They capture about 1,400 men. They lose one man to the exposure of the elements, the cold, and things like that. But it's this huge, huge moment, right? We talked about in class this Princeton Battle, where you're going to basically have, don't worry about all the fine details here, and don't really worry about the battle at all, but just to kind of add to the narrative here, you're going to have Washington basically fooling Cornwallis with those campfires we talked about in class, and basically move around him and basically take his rear guard, right? So there's going to be a big turn. Though that's one big turning point, but the big turning point that Virginia's going to want you to know anyway is going to come from the Battle of Saratoga. So you're going to have this General John Burgoyne. He's going to present this new plan, basically to cut off New England. And basically, do I have a map on the next page? Hopefully, do I have a map somewhere? Do I have a map anywhere? I don't. Sorry. So anyway, he's going to basically decide to cut them off, right? If you cut down the Hudson River, essentially, you'll cut off the Boston, Massachusetts colonies and all of those northern colonies, and you basically cut off the head of the snake, like Mr. McNabb was talking about, right? And that's what they aim to do, right? So the plan is essentially that General Howe is going to march to Albany from New York City. Burgoyne's going to come down from Canada, and then he's going to kind of split off with another one of his smaller generals, and they're going to take it from kind of three sides. The reality actually happens, which you talk about, right? General Howe doesn't march up because of their rivalry, essentially. He heads toward Philadelphia. This other minor general, he's going to kind of head west to try to take another fort. It's going to leave Burgoyne all by himself, and as a result, Burgoyne, about 5,000 of his men are going to be captured at Saratoga. And this is going to be really, really important because this is going to be the moment where the French are going to decide that this is actually worth them basically dumping resources, putting men and money and military, equipment and things like that into this, right? So they do. And you're going to kind of get this kind of complete new mindset to the war. But you're going to have this kind of terrible, terrible winter at Valley Forge, which we talked about in class as well. They're going to be in this Valley Forge. It's right about 15, 20 miles west of Philadelphia. It's going to be a horrible winter. You're going to have smallpox running rampant. They're going to actually inoculate all of these people. You're going to get this man, right, Baron von Steuben, who's going to come in and he's going to whip these Continental Army into fighting shape once spring kind of comes around. And as that happens, the American army is going to, on some level, while it's a really tough winter, they're going to come out of it tougher and meaner, being kind of more like a professional army by being drilled by this man, von Steuben, right? So don't really worry about these slides. So now, once things kind of start to go a little more sour in the north for the British, what's going to happen is they're going to kind of alter their plan. They're going to come in from the south. They're going to kind of sweep around, and they're going to basically go down to the south. The British are going to take Savannah. They're going to take Charleston, right? They have this big navy that follows them and resupplies and, and moves men, essentially. They're looking to take advantage of this high Loyalist, this high Tory population in the South, right, where essentially they are Anglican, right? They're the Church of England, and it's going to become this kind of really harsh fighting. It's going to become the main battleground later in the late stages of the war. And the tides turn on some level. The British initially kind of take those two big cities and capture some American troops, but you're going to get these guerrilla tactics, which we talked about. That's going to frustrate the British in the swampy southern areas. And after the kind of these initial losses, the colonists are going to be able to secure these victories in the south. And as we get to it, right, the Battle of Yorktown, Cornwallis is going to have to resupply on the coast, and this is going to kind of be the end of the actual war. The Battle of Yorktown, right, he gets trapped by the Continental and French army and ultimately the French fleet, and it's going to, as a result, force him to surrender, right? The British Navy can't get there to allow him to retreat, and, as this war was going on and as it took longer and longer, what's going to happen in England is the popular support for the war is going to drastically decrease and stop. And when that happens, and when Yorktown happens, there's going to be no more support for it in England, and even in Parliament. And as a result for that, the war is going to be over. They're going to lose the will to fight, and they're not going to want to fight anymore, even though they probably could have kept the war going. But at this point, it seemed like a foregone conclusion that they were going to. It was not going to work itself out. Right? You have Marquis de Lafayette, who's French. He acts as a big commander of the French troops here. You have Alexander Hamilton actually taking charge of some of the American troops as well, storming the ramparts, getting over the ramparts in Yorktown. So last but not least in our little thing tonight, and maybe to be here for a minute or two to field any last questions you guys may have, but you're going to get this Treaty of Paris that essentially is the end of this conflict, right? It's the official end. It happens a couple of years later just because the terms take a little while to negotiate, but on April 15th, 1783, don't worry about the date, the British are going to basically officially recognize the United States as an independent nation, and this is huge, right, for the Americans. This is what they've been aiming for. The U.S. is going to now own all of that land that the British owned, right, all the way out to the Mississippi River after the French and Indian War. You're going to get a northern border of the United States. It's going to stop at the Great Lakes and our current border with Canada. Canada will still be British. Okay, so that's going to kind of come back into play during the War of 1812. We're going to be talking about later in the year. The southern border is going to now stop at Florida, which is going to be returned to Spain as part of Spain helping with this revolution a little bit as well. And so those are the big things. Don't worry about that last part. But the U.S. is going to actually have to pay Loyalists for the property that they had lost in the war. But the states are going to mainly many of them are going to ignore this. Okay. So any last questions that you guys have? That was I think we did a good job at kind of doing a whole once over of all of the material in only about 45 minutes. So I think that was pretty good. I hope you guys got something out of it. So if you have any last questions, I'll stay around for a couple minutes just to kind of talk about them and get them on the record and answer them for you guys. So, Maddie, So what do you need to know? What do we need to know about common sense? Okay, so because there's going to be multiple choice, right? So sorry, I don't know why a bunch of these questions just kind of started to shoot up on me that I didn't see in a second. So we were going to pay attention. Sorry about that. Okay, so let me address these quick. So, I'm not going to do a Kahoot in the live stream because we're doing one in class for the start of you guys, right? The quiz is going to be multiple choice. It is. It's going to be about 20 questions again, yes. So what do you need to know about common sense? Good, I actually didn't talk about common sense. Thank you for bringing that up. That's really important. So you have Thomas Paine, right? Thomas Paine is going to basically release this pamphlet known as Common Sense, right? And Common Sense is essentially it's on some level a piece of propaganda, but it makes a really good point and really good case and argument for the American independence, right? It's basically all of these reasons why America can do better off without the help of Great Britain, right? We have all of these resources, we have all of these, people that are really good and they can what they do, all of these different things. There's no sense in basically having this long delay between any communication with England, being 3,000 miles away. It's silly to be ruled by someone that far away, governed by someone that far away, when we can do it ourselves. So it's this really big argument, and there's going to be thousands and thousands of these pamphlets that are going to be printed with the help of the printing press, which isn't that old at this point. And it's going to be shot all around the colonies and kind of add to this fire about this, right? So, Maddie, the Treaty of Paris is the official end of the war, right? There's really no more hostilities, though, after the Battle of Yorktown. So the Battle of Yorktown is the last battle, and then the Treaty of Paris is the end of, it's basically them coming to the table and talking and deciding how this is all going to end. Does that make sense? I hope so. Do I know who you are? I can't possibly know by that username, so I'm sorry. You should start doing a Kahoot if you can with this little study group. It'd help a lot. Maybe I will. Maybe I will next time, but I don't have one prepared tonight. So something like that. You guys could all, that would actually be kind of funny because you guys could all log in if I put the code up. So you could all play from all different areas in your houses and stuff like that. So maybe if, next time around, maybe we can do that. That'd be kind of fun, actually. Okay, so any last questions for you guys? If not, then I'm going to turn this off and call it a night. And remember that you can rewind to listen to any part again if you'd like, or you can simply just watch the archive when it's all done being uploaded about half an hour from now. Okay? And there are a couple minutes in the beginning that just have the text on the screen, so just fast forward through that when you watch the archive later. Okay? So no last questions. I'm going to end it in about 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Night, guys. Good luck studying. See you guys tomorrow.